This is modeled after the Rubik's twist, or snake as it's sometimes called. This one is a good deal more frustrating than the store-bought version, but it's also pretty simple to make, so I suppose this is worth making for those of you who are like me and always have to fidget with something. And if you're patient, you'll be able to bring order to it. Let's start out by looking at the parts. Each looks like an isosceles right triangle from the side. Isosceles just means that there are two equal sides in the triangle. Anyhow, the parts are each just one half of a cube. We could start the way that I did for this prototype, by cutting some square stock and then cutting off the 45-degree triangles. This method does produce a nice looking finished product, because while the puzzle is laying flat, we're looking at face grain. But I found it to be a little difficult to cut the pieces to an extremely high tolerance consistently, even with a sled. So for this one, I'm trying a different method. I recommend keeping zero clearance plates for all of the major common angles. A single cut will produce two pieces of the triangular stock. And the point here is that ripping all of the triangles at once should kind of ensure their uniformity. It's probably time to change this old 10-inch blade, so now I get to sand off some burn marks. Now I just have to cut them for length, which is easy enough with the sled. You can tell if you're doing it right by comparing the length you just cut to the triangular stock. Remember, we're making half cubes, so keep that in mind for making adjustments. Next, it's time to chamfer. Ideally, you've already built one of these things. But since you probably don't have one, there are alternatives, like this simple jig for the disc sander. As for getting this edge here, along the hypotenuse of the triangle, it's going to take a little bit of creativity. And that's why I have a chamfer sander. As for the edges at the acute angles, I think they look the nicest with only a half chamfer, so I do them two at a time. Well, after 4 minutes about how to make a wooden prism, you're probably pretty curious about how this articulation works. So let me show you. When coming up with a joint for this thing, one of the most important considerations that I had was, how do I make it so that it's not easily broken? And this is the joint that I came up with. This little white part here, it functions as somewhat of a bearing, and all it is a piece of 1/4 inch inside diameter PVC pipe. And a common drywall screw is able to rotate on it with very little friction. All of the pieces in the puzzle look like this one in the center, with the exception of the two end pieces. Tightening or loosening the adjustment screw determines how difficult it is to spin the pieces. This is a reasonably simple jig to make, and it can help us drill perfectly perpendicular holes. There's a very fine line between a hole that's been drilled too loose and one that's too snug. But it is possible to adjust a Forstner bit almost an imperceptibly small amount by running it backwards in your drill and holding a piece of sandpaper against it. I think after a coat of mineral oil I will call this finished. I hope you enjoyed watching.